Thanks everyone for joining us this morning and getting up early to join me for an introduction to the crime analysis solution add-in for ArcGIS Pro. My name's Chris Delaney. I'm the law enforcement technical lead at ESRI. I've been at ESRI for about 6 years, and my role at ESRI is to help law enforcement agencies understand how to apply ESRI's technology, ArcGIS, to law enforcement workflows. But in my previous life, I was the Director of Business Intelligence at the Rochester, New York Police Department for 13 years. So I did gang intelligence in the narcotics unit, and I ran the crime analysis unit, eventually ran the crime analysis center, and when I left, I was upstairs doing strategic research, planning, and supporting things like the CompStat process, and working with the Deputy Chief, who was then Mike Wood, on strategic planning, public information, those kinds of things. So that's a long way of saying I've worn a lot of analytical hats during my time at RPD before I joined ESRI. So one of the things that I want to talk about with you today, as my role in the law enforcement team at ESRI, is to help build technology to support the law enforcement community. And one of the things that we've built recently is a new add-in for our desktop software for crime analysis use. And I want to talk about that primarily today. But I want to kind of cover a number of topics. First, that add-in is for our new version of desktop GIS that's called ArcGIS Pro. Just out of curiosity, how many of you are already using some kind of ESRI product? ArcMap? Is anyone using ArcGIS Pro already? Okay, so a bunch of hands for ArcMap, a few less for ArcGIS Pro, but a bunch of hands for ArcGIS Pro as well. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with what ArcGIS Pro is, we're going to talk about ArcGIS Pro. We're going to talk about the crime analysis solution and some of the tools and capabilities that it delivers to help crime analysts do their job easier and deliver additional functionality than what just standard desktop GIS alone offers. We'll show you some examples of those capabilities with some demonstrations, and I'll show you resources on how to get started with ArcGIS Pro and the crime analysis solution. So you'll see a lot of things here today, and in many classes when I teach this kind of workshop or presentation, you might see something you want to go, oh, let me take a screenshot of that. Don't worry about it. The last slide in my presentation is a short URL. That short URL will contain this PowerPoint and a whole bunch of links to all of the content that I've shared with you during this presentation. So if there's one thing that you want to do, take a screenshot of, it'll be the last slide in the presentation in that short URL. Otherwise, don't kill yourself and just sit back and enjoy me blathering on for 60 minutes. So the capability that I'll show you today, the crime analysis solution, is a new tool for crime analysis, and it exists only for ESRI's modern desktop GIS software. We call that ArcGIS Pro. It is the new version of our software that has existed now for about 30 years in various forms called ArcMap. ArcMap is the kind of default standard for most people performing mapping for crime and intelligence analysis purposes, but it's been around for a really long time. It's got lots of legacy code. It's a 32-bit application, so if you're a longtime user of ArcMap, you know that it has a tendency to hang up when you crunch it on a lot of data. It's got that old Windows look and feel, and frankly, it is a behemoth of a set of capabilities. And for a lot of analysts, it's like driving a Lamborghini to go pick up groceries. It's a lot of capability, and you're only going to use kind of some set of that capability for the work that you do in crime analysis and supporting law enforcement. So ESRI, as a company, is retiring ArcMap. I know my slide says support for 5 more years. That's a soft 5. But basically, the important thing to know is that there's not going to be any new features or capabilities coming to ArcMap. What you see is what you get, and it is no longer what we view as kind of our flagship desktop software. So now is really the time to make the change from our old desktop software to our new desktop software. And that's called ArcGIS Pro. That is our next generation desktop GIS software, and that's where all of the new capabilities are going to live for desktop GIS analysis. And there's a couple reasons why you're going to care about ArcGIS Pro. First, it's a 64-bit app and it's multi-threaded. What does that mean in practice? Well, it means it doesn't hang up on you as much. And you can run a tool and then keep working in the map doing other things while a tool runs in the background. You're going to see a significant increase in performance. It's also much easier to use, as it's kind of hard to see here in this screenshot, but as I'll show in my demonstration. The layout is similar to all modern Microsoft Office products. So you've got that ribbon-based interface, and that surfaces tools in a more intuitive user interface than ArcMap. And as far as organizing your work in ArcGIS Pro, it's much simpler. So you get a folder for your project that contains a default geodatabase, and that's where any of your files can live. You can have 2D and 3D maps in your project at once. You've got improved search tools. You can have as many layouts in a single ArcGIS Pro project as you want. So it's much easier to work with ArcGIS Pro projects as opposed to ArcMap, where you have an MXD and you can only have one map layout in each MXD, and you have a default geodatabase, and that could live someplace completely different on your computer, and it all starts to get very confusing. One of the areas that's most exciting about ArcGIS Pro is some of the modern capabilities that we're bringing to ArcGIS Pro, including new pattern detection tools using machine learning, improved statistical analysis capabilities. So we've got a generalized linear model. If you're doing regressions with count data and you need to do a Poisson model, you can do that in ArcGIS Pro. You can't do that in ArcMap. You want to do random forest analysis. Well, we have a random forest tool inside of ArcGIS Pro. You're doing more robust statistical analysis in either R or in SciPy. Both of those statistical package sets work seamlessly with ArcGIS Pro. So if you want to call a statistical package from R as a script tool in ArcGIS Pro, you can, and vice versa. If there's a tool in ArcGIS Pro that you like and you want to be able to call in R, you can do that using our R bridge between ArcGIS Pro and R. And we're really pushing some new capabilities around supporting visualization and symbology options that are really exciting in ArcGIS Pro. Now, one thing that I should mention, because it does get kind of brought up occasionally because people are used to working with ArcMap and they see this new thing called ArcGIS Pro and they think, well, what is this thing? It lives somewhere else. It's not a desktop software. Just to be clear, in case it's been brought up to you that somehow you can't use ArcGIS Pro because it's like web software or something like that, ArcGIS Pro is desktop software. It is the same thing fundamentally as ArcMap. It can live entirely locally. It does not have any outside internet dependencies whatsoever. You can have ArcMap and ArcGIS Pro on your computer both at the same time at once. So it will operate in completely disconnected environments where there's no internet dependencies whatsoever. You name the DoD agency, and they have disconnected environments that are running ArcGIS Pro today. So how does ArcGIS Pro relate to ArcMap? Well, very simply, when you have a ArcGIS desktop license, that's what we call the license that you buy from ESRI, you get both at the same time. You get a license for ArcMap, plus you get a license for ArcGIS Pro. So if you have an ArcMap license now, you already own ArcGIS Pro. There's no additional cost from an ESRI perspective to ArcGIS Pro. You already own it with access to ArcMap. And you also have one named user into our whole WebGIS set of capabilities. So that's the most important thing for analysts to know about this technology, is if your agency is already paying for you to have ArcMap, you have the ability to have ArcGIS Pro now, and you can take advantage of what I'm going to show you today. There's just a couple of kind of high-level things when it comes to ArcGIS Pro that I want to highlight. You know, when it comes to the way the user face is, it's new, but it should be at the same time very familiar. So this is a screenshot that shows the interface of ArcGIS Pro, but the components to it are fairly straightforward. you'll see tools surface on a contextual ribbon, just like Microsoft Excel, PowerPoint, Word, or Access. You can see in the main part of the interface views of maps and layouts. When you turn one of these off, it doesn't go away, it just hides it in a catalog, so you can recall maps, as many as you want at any given time. You can show multiple maps at the same time as well. The properties of any tool that you use show up in panes that are docked along the side or can float freely. And you've got a table of contents the way that you're used to working with it in ArcMap. So all those things come together, and it gives you an experience that is new but familiar to ArcMap users. I've already mentioned kind of a number of these things, but kind of the core idea with ArcGIS Pro is that you can store everything in one single project. So it's easy to find the different pieces and parts of things that you're working with. Layers, geodatabases, tools that you've created, tasks, styles. So that's a little bit on ArcGIS Pro. What I want to spend the rest of the time talking about is our new crime analysis solution for ArcGIS Pro. We released this last year in July. We've subsequently done one update to it that just came out this July. And we built this tool, which is free to download and use, to help crime analysts and intelligence analysts and law enforcement both make the transition from ArcMap to ArcGIS Pro easier, to make new users of desktop GIS, make that process of learning desktop GIS easier, and just generally to support law enforcement analysts with new custom tools that are relevant to their work. And so what we've done with this crime analysis ribbon, and you can see the ribbon up here, is we've organized a combination of out-of-the-box tools that already come with ArcGIS Pro, plus some brand new tools that we've built specifically for crime analyst workflows. And we've put them into this ribbon and organized the ribbon according to kind of the standard analysis process. So if you're an Intel analyst, roughly analogous to the intelligence cycle. So you've got tools for data management, bringing your data in, getting it on a map, cleaning it up. Then tools for querying and selecting your data. Then tools for, we call it tactical and strategic analysis. They're primarily tools around hotspot analysis. Then a section on investigative analysis tools. And then lastly, once you've done an analysis, being able to share that work and expose it either as hard copy maps or to be able to publish it into your map portal to be able to create interactive mapping products like web applications or mobile applications, Storymaps, or dashboards. A couple of the highlights that I want to just kind of walk through particularly quickly, and I'll show some examples in a few minutes, is obviously we've got a whole bunch of the most common forms of hotspot tools in here. What you're seeing right here in this screenshot is a tool that lets you do not just kernel density, but kernel density change. So from the current 28-day period compared to the previous 28-day periods, which areas got hotter, which areas got colder. That's useful in understanding emerging trends. It's also useful in trying to understand if you've done some kind of operation, whether or not you had an impact on a previously hot area. This one's a little hard to see, but being able to do crime series sequences. So if you've had some kind of crime series, a robbery series, a motor vehicle theft series, to understand the order of those incidents, to be able to do things like understand the offender's activity space and how they're targeting a particular area. You can also use this tool for fairly straightforward things like, hey, you're supporting an investigation, you put a bumper beeper on a suspect's car, and I wanted to understand kind of where is this person going over the course of their day, and I've got a bunch of GPS data. Well, now I can draw the line that connects all those in order of when that GPS ping occurred. Tools to be able to support linking between two layers. So the example here is pretty straightforward. In yellow, motor vehicle thefts, and green is the location where the motor vehicle theft was recovered. But it also supports being able to do kind of financial analysis where you have a sender of a wire transfer and a recipient of a wire transfer, and understanding volumes and being able to create arrows that link those two layers together and categorize the width of the arrow based on the volume of the transaction. That tool also works for one-to-many relationships here, gang members to gang turf. But also you could think of that for an analysis like looking at heroin arrests, where you're looking at scenarios where multiple people were arrested. Where do they live relative to where were they arrested? Like to test this idea that it's all the suburban kids coming into the city to buy heroin, and that's the crux of our problem. Okay, well, you could use a tool like that to understand spatially what is the relationship between where the arrest is occurring and where the offenders live. 80-20 analysis to identify repeat problem locations. Just being able to do simple percent change charts. So in this example, blue represents a decrease from the previous period to the current period. Red represents an increase. One thing I should mention with all of the new custom tools that we built for this solution is that it's not only running the actual analysis, but it's doing some out-of-the-box symbology and labeling for you. So the idea here is it's getting you to a final version of the analysis quicker. That's not to say that the symbology or the labeling is 100% what you want, but at least it's a start, and it'll get you a little bit further down the road to completing your analysis faster. And you know, a couple of things that we've added this year is a whole new set of tools for cell phone analysis. So if you're doing any kind of cell phone analysis, we have tools that will let you ingest your cell site and sector data and render those, associate call detail records to them, and then perform a variety of analyses on them. Could be something simple like a sequencing analysis, but we have a bunch of other more sophisticated tools. And we also ported our existing tools for repeat and near repeat victimization analysis, the ability to build crime predictions off of that, into ArcGIS Pro as well. And one of the really exciting things that just came out this July is the ability to finally, it's only taken 20 years, do calendar heat charts or temporal topology charts where you've got hour a day, day a week. So if you're looking at a hotspot and you want to understand when is this hotspot hot so I can deploy proactive resources, now I can do that interactively inside ArcGIS Pro. That was kind of a real pain thing that a lot of analysts would. They'd do this hotspot analysis, they'd have to extract that data, they'd go put it in Excel, and they'd create that temporal topology chart in Excel. I personally did that tons of times. Now you can do that entirely within ArcGIS Pro. One of the things that I'll just show very briefly that I'm really excited about with ArcGIS Pro that I wanted to mention to you is a new capability that we call tasks. And the reason why tasks are important is that tasks are now a way within ArcGIS Pro to build and then share a workflow where you perform a series of geoprocessing steps in order to achieve an outcome. So let's just talk about, you know, doing any kind of standard analysis. Well, any kind of standard analysis in the abstract, I have to bring my data in and I have to geocode it, whether that's addresses or X's and Y's. Then I've got to make selections on that data. Then I need to perform an analysis. Then I need to perform some kind of styling on that, whether that's symbology and labeling. And then I'm going to create some kind of output product. So a process of 6 steps in order to create some kind of output, right? With tasks, we can document those steps. And now, so let's say I'm a senior analyst. I could say, here's how I want this particular type of analysis to be done. I can create those steps. I can surface each tool inside of a little task window. I can even preset parameters. And then I can give that thing as a single file to junior analysts. And the junior analysts can pick it up. They can go, okay, well, I have to do this. Here's the tool that I have to use. It's all inside this one little task window. And it holds my hand through a sequence of steps. Tasks are a fantastic tool for training analysts and for reinforcing workflows, ensuring that they're being done a certain way. That's a really exciting new capability in ArcGIS Pro. It's something that we're going to build some free solutions around in the future, but it's only in ArcGIS Pro. So it's something I want to make you aware of. This is another reason why ArcGIS Pro is really kind of the thing you want to start to make your migration to from ArcMap. So let's take a look at kind of what we've got available in ArcMap and some examples of this stuff. Okay, so this is ArcGIS Pro. This is an example ArcGIS Pro project that you get when you download the crime analysis solution. So you'll have all of this data ready to play with and examples of each of these tools. And I'll talk about how you do that in a little bit. When I go to the crime analysis ribbon, I can see I've got my tools for data management, selection tools, tactical and strategic analysis, investigative analysis, and being able to create and share information. And I wanted to just highlight a couple of tools that I think are particularly relevant for analysts. I have some arrest data here. This arrest data is pretty straightforward. It's got all sorts of, arrest ID, the offense, the name of the individual, and the date and time of the arrest. This is hard to see, but as I mouse over that field, under type, it says text. So a common problem a lot of analysts have is that they bring data in, and it has a date field, but the date field is represented as a text, so now I can't interact with it as if it's a date field. Pretty common problem a lot of analysts have. The first tool that we have in the data management section under the Enhanced Attributes category is a tool called Convert Time Field. This tool enables me to identify the format that my data as a text field is in. So in this instance, it's a mm-dd-yyyy space HH:MM. That's the structure of my date as a text field. What I can do with this little tool is say, okay, here is that field, arrest date time. I want to define my format of that. So it's MM, DD, YYYY, HH:/S, HHMM. And now it'll create a new field for me in my data set that converts that date as text field to a real date field. So now I can run this tool, and I'll get that new field in just a minute. So that's an example of kind of a simple and fairly straightforward capability that exists in the crime analysis solution to help you massage your data a little bit better. As that's running, I just want to mention a couple of other tools that you can see here that are grayed out right now because the tool is running. In particular, extract date parts to field. So once I have a valid date valid date field, I can click on this tool. I should now have a new valid date field. There it is, arrest date time converted. That's the one I just created. Now what I can do with this tool is say, all right, I have a valid date field, but now I want to create new fields that are just various parts of the date. So weekday, hour, month, day of month, year. Those are all my options. I can run that tool, and now what this is going to do is create a unique field for each of those. Why would you want to do that? Well, maybe you want to be able to do some summary statistics on them. You want to do some bar charts or something like that. Or maybe you want to feed a dashboard where you're going to want that data organized in that way. Now you've got the ability to do that. Really pretty straightforward and simple. So that's another example of one of the capabilities that are in here. The last tool in the Enhanced Attribute section that I want to mention is a tool called Append Attributes to Polygon. One of the most common problems new analysts have with basic manipulation of spatial data is that ESRI has this complicated thing called a spatial join. A spatial join is where we take data from two different layers and we try to smush it together based on their relative location to one another. And when it comes to crime data, that generally happens in two ways, where you have point data, like arrest data or crime data, and you want to append information from the polygon to the point. So I have an arrest. I need to know what precinct this arrest occurred in. So I append that data spatially from my polygon layer, where it lives, into my point data. Conversely, I have polygon layer data, precinct data, and I have point data. And I want to know how many arrests occurred in precinct 17. That's a different kind of spatial join. That's point to polygon versus polygon to point. This difference is thing that really trips up analysts for some reason. It's a little bit of nuance, but it's an important nuance. So what we've done with this tool set is broken those two concepts into two completely separate tools. So when you want to take polygon data and append information from a polygon layer into a point layer, we have a new tool called Append Attributes from Polygon. So we can run that right now on our arrest data, and we're going to append our precincts layer, information about our precincts layer into our arrest layer. We're going to add in the district ID, and now I'll run that tool. And once that's done running, we'll look at the attribute table of this arrests layer, and we'll see all of the new data that we've created with these tools. So we've created we've run 3 tools, and we created a valid date field from a field that was text but was represented a date. We created date parts of that date field, and now we've created a field that tells us what precinct the arrest occurred in. So I'm going to right-click on my attribute table, and here we go. Here's my data. Let me make this a little bit bigger so it's easier for you guys to see. If I scroll all the way to the end, I can start to see, all right, here was my arrest date time field as text. Here is my new field that's been converted to a valid date field. I then use that to create these subsequent fields. A day of the week in plain English language. An hour of day field. A month field, a day field, and a year field. It's kind of handy, right? And then lastly, I did an append from my precincts layer with the district ID into each arrest record, and now I have the precinct in which each of those occurred. Simple tools, not that complicated, but meant to make some of the more common data management issues that analysts run into more accessible. Just lastly, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on them because I could spend 60 minutes on these two tools entirely. There's 2 tools here. You'll notice one is called Setup Import and Import Records. These 2 tools work together to help you automate geocoding processes. So what this does for you is enables you to define an address locator that you're going to use to geocode data with, or if it has XYs, you're going to identify the fields that contain XYs. And then it also enables you to say, all right, where am I going to put this data once it's geocoded? You can save it off to a local file geodatabase on your computer or on a network drive, or you can publish it into a hosted feature layer in either ArcGIS Online in the cloud or in ArcGIS Enterprise inside your environment. And that enables you to then do all the cool WebGIS stuff like Storymaps and dashboards. The thing that's very powerful about this tool is that not only can this tool be run manually, but it can also be automated using a Python script that's behind this in Windows Task Scheduler. So now you can automate this process where every single day it's reaching out to either a table view that you have in a database somewhere, or maybe your database administrator just gives you a SQL or a CSV extract to take that data every day, geocode it, and publish it, and have it ready to go either as a local layer or as a hosted layer. And so in that way, it's helping you to solve the daily data management problem that many analysts run into, where they're spending a majority of their morning just trying to geocode data and get it organized and ready for analysis. Now all that can happen overnight, and you don't have to deal with that process anymore. I have a whole webinar on how to go through building that. Again, that's a 60 to 90 minute class by itself, so we're not going to cover the details on it, but I want you to know that it's available. The next tool I want to show you, in the selection area, we have a bunch of the standard ways you can select and query data, but we built a new one because dates are a thing that analysts really struggle with. We built a new tool that's called Select by Date and Time. Has anybody had the pleasurable experience of trying to figure out query residential burglaries that happen between Thursday and Friday from 6 a.m. to 2 p.m. in ArcMap? That's like 500 characters worth of a nested SQL expression that, God forbid, you miss one parentheses or you got one little piece of that expression wrong and the whole thing dies, and it's really frustrating, right? what we've tried to do with this tool is make date and time querying more plain language. So here again, I have my arrest layer. I can make a new selection, or I can work this off of an existing selection. So I can use this in tandem with a regular select by attributes or select by location. And then I can pick a valid date field that I've just created. And now I have a whole bunch of options. I can select by year and then just type in the years that I want with a comma in between. I can select by month, just simple checkbox, really easy to do. I can select by day of the week, and we've got weekend or weekdays preset, or you can just have checkboxes to pick those. And I can select by time of day, so any kind of date range. And this will respect moving from one day to the next day. So if you say, hey, I want things from, a certain time frame from 11 p.m. to 2 a.m., it honors that continuum. And then the thing that analysts often like with this tool is under select by date, we've got a bunch of standard options, single date, date range, but the last two are the ones that are cool. By recency lets you say, give me everything in the last 28 days. So you can do that kind of query. Or comparative time period is going to give you the previous 28 days. So the 28 days before the current 28-day period. So that's an easier way to do those kinds of comp-stat-y selections without having to know precisely the beginning and the end date. So let's just really quickly take a look at this. I want to just grab, I'm not sure what data is in here, so I'm going to grab May, June, and July. And I'm going to run this tool. Oh, what am I missing? Let me grab. I'm not sure what's in here. Do that. I think this is 2018 data. Select 2018. What am I missing? Let's go from 2018 to 31, 2018, and May, June, and July. I'll run that. And when it makes the selection, I want to highlight one new capability that's pretty handy about ArcGIS Pro that's unique compared to ArcMap. So my selection is here, or I selected May, June, and July. And you'll notice because I've got the arrest layer selected in my table of contents, in the selection set of the crime analysis toolbar, you'll see a new tool that turned on called Layer from Selection. And what this tool does is it creates a temporary layer of the points that I selected. So if I turn off my arrest layer, I can see that I have my arrest selection layer on. And now I can work with that layer in a temporary basis as if it was its own standalone layer. So this makes the process of selecting data and then having subsets of data that you can work with temporarily a lot easier to work with. And so in that respect, it's I prefer it to the way that I used to handle this stuff, which was to make a copy of each layer and then to apply a definition query to it. But now this is a slightly faster way to iterate. So that's the kind of new tool in the selection set of tools. Now I want to just highlight a couple of the new tools for hotspot analysis, some of the investigative analysis tools, and then we'll talk about resources. The first tool I want to look at is our incident count tool. This is the flip side of spatial joins, where I want to count the number of crimes that occur in a precinct. This tool is, again, pretty straightforward. It's just enter a polygon layer, which is my precincts, enter my point data, which is my arrests, and then it's going to create an output for me that looks like this. A yellow to red color schema that represents the number of the counts of incidents. It's by equal interval, I think, by default. And it provides you a label that's already been pre-symbolized. So again, you can change the symbology here and modify it. You can change the labeling. It's really straightforward. If you have a desktop advanced license, so this is only for people who have a desktop advanced license, there is another optional parameter here called category field. What this is going to enable you to do is create a distinct count for each value found in a particular field. So this is arrest data. Let's say I wanted to have a distinct count per precinct of the number of each type of offenses in that precinct. So I've got a field called offense description. Then when I would run that, in the attribute table of this data, I'll expand this up, not only am I going to get kind of the total number of arrests in each jurisdiction, if you scroll back here, you can see that I have a distinct field for each type of arrest in that precinct. So really, really simplifying some of the kind of slicing and dicing and data organization that you need to do. The area where I find this to be particularly helpful is in strategic analysis or longitudinal analysis, where you've got a whole bunch of data and you need to summarize by year. Being able to summarize by year, by geographic boundaries, really, really helpful tool. Again, that is only available through our Desktop Advanced, but it is something that we're working on for the future to try to bring that licensing level down a little bit. So that's the incident count tool. The next tool that I wanted to highlight is percent change. The percent change tool is super simple. It has 3 main parameters. So give me a point layer for your current period, give me a point layer for your previous period, and then the polygon layer that you want to evaluate. The big dots in this map are violent crimes in the 3rd quarter. The little dots are violent crimes in the 2nd quarter. So I'm looking 2nd quarter to 3rd quarter. What's the change precinct to precinct? The output of this map looks something like this. So for each precinct, it's going to color it. It's using a range of plus minus 10% on either side. So blue represents decreases, red represents increases, and you've got a nice label that shows you the percent change, the current value, and the previous value. So all of that is happening when you run the tool. You don't have to do that. And again, you can change those values, you can modify the symbology, but it's doing all that work for you. Simplifying, simplifying, simplifying. The last tool that I wanted to show in this section is the 80-20 analysis tool. So this is great for identifying problem locations as part of some kind of problem-oriented policing or SARA-based project. Here I've got some calls for service data. When I run this tool, has anybody ever done an 80-20 analysis previously? Okay, that's okay. So what this tool is going to do is create an output for me. Looking at these calls for service, that's going to look something like this, where I've got graduated symbology, where the size of the symbol represents the number of calls that happened at that location. The top 20% of all locations are the ones that get symbolized, and it's going to give you the address, it's going to give you the count, and the percent of total that that location represents for your calls. But there's another thing that's kind of handy in here. So if I open up the attribute table of this particular tool, I'm going to get for each address the number of calls that happened at that location, the percentage of the total number of calls that that location represents. But then I've got another value here that's cumulative percentage. So if I go down here to the 20th highest volume call location, 631 North Route 29, I can see that the cumulative percentage represents 25.7. So that means that 25.7% of all calls for service occurred at only 20 locations. So from a strategic prioritization perspective, we targeted those 20 locations for some kind of strategy for call reductions. By understanding the unique nature of each of the problems there, we could hope to achieve as much as a 25% reduction in call volume. So that's a really handy little tool to be able to simplify that kind of analysis. The last thing that I want to show in this section is our density change tool. The density change tool is pretty comparable to the percent change tool. So you have a current period and a previous period. You run a kernel density on both of those. So importantly, you have to use the exact same parameters on both of those. Otherwise, you're comparing apples to apples. But then the result of, so I've got my daytime is in light blue, and I've got my nighttime in dark blue. So on the light blue, here's my hotspots for daytime calls for service. And then here's my nighttime calls. Oops, there's my nighttime calls and my nighttime hotspots. And I want to know, are there changes from daytime to nighttime? And that's what this tool is going to provide for me. So it's going to pre-symbolize that red to blue color gradient, red representing areas where in the nighttime it gets hotter, blue areas it gets colder relative to daytime calls. Make sense? Okay, so I don't have time to go over all the tools. Unfortunately, I'm just trying to do a couple of highlights. I want to show just very briefly some of the tools in the investigative analysis section. The first one I showed you in a screenshot. It's really straightforward. Any point layer that has valid date data, you can run it on. So I've got here a motor vehicle theft series, these yellow dots. I can then organize and sort that by a valid date value. When I run that tool, I'm going to get an output that looks like this, where it's going to order those incidents based on the date of occurrence and then draw a connecting line between them. Really simple tool. My incident path tool I showed before as well. This is for two layers that share a common attribute. In this case, it's the crime report number. My first layer is the motor vehicle thefts in yellow, and green is the location where they were recovered. When I run this tool, I'm going to be able to get those linking arrows that are going to help connect them so I can create a link map so I can understand the spatial relationships of movement between those two locations. This tool also supports, as I mentioned earlier, new capabilities where if you have a numeric value, like a dollar amount for a financial transaction, you can sum or average so that you can then create graduated symbols for those arrows representing total volumes of transactions or average volumes of transactions so that you can start to see kind of patterns emerge between senders and recipients. So a great tool for financial analysis. Also, as I mentioned, it's supported in a one-to-many relationship. So this is gang member home addresses relative to the gang territory that they're part of. The thing that's notable here is, if you'll note, the gang territory is a polygon, not a point. So this tool works on polygon data as well, and it'll take the centroid of the polygon. So if you did want to run it point to polygon, it'll work that way. I mentioned earlier that we built some brand new tools for cell phone analysis. The cell phone analysis tools, again, I could spend another 60 minutes by myself on those tools, but we don't have time to dig into them in great detail. But they basically will enable you to take that spreadsheet data that you get from a subpoena that's got the location of the cell tower and the sectors, and to first render those towers in sectors like this, where you've got the tower sector and the tower, and then any sectors associated with it. Any of the data that's created in those tools exists in both the tower point layer and in the sector polygon layer. So however you want to do your analysis, if you don't want to deal with the sectors, you don't have to. All of the data comes over and is rendered at both the polygon for the tower, or the point for the tower, and the polygon for the sector. But we have a whole bunch of tools. The simplest one is just being able to do sequencing of calls. So you're applying that incident sequence tool to the order in which the cell phone calls occurred, so you can get at pattern of life analysis. But there's a number of additional capabilities in here that are pretty cool. Repeat call patterns, so if you want to be able to understand where people are when they're calling each other over and over again, you can run that tool. We have a really interesting tool called space-time comparison that says basically, all right, I have two call records, and I want to know if these people were ever roughly within a quarter mile of one another in a 3-hour window. and it'll do that analysis for you, and it'll show you the locations where they both made a call within that kind of space-time set of parameters. So it's great for kind of testing investigative hunches on two particular investigative targets that you believe may have been somewhere, and you think the call record will have evidence of that. This gives you a mechanism to be able to test that out with having to go line by line through every single call and try to match those up. So the last thing that I want to show you before I kind of talk about how to get started with this stuff is the new charting capabilities that I'm pretty excited about. So I'm just going to go back and open up some crime data. So I mentioned that we've got our brand new calendar heat chart. I can create that chart up on the last section of the crime analysis toolbar. And it's called a calendar heat chart. To create a calendar heat chart, it's pretty straightforward. I simply am going to pick the date value that I want. So I'm going to pick reported date. And I can either select year by month and day and month, or day of week and hour of day. I can characterize how I want to group it. So I'm going to group it by equal intervals. And now I've got a ready-to-use chart. Awesome. I'm going to move it over here and dock it so it's a little bit easier to see my map, even though that makes my chart look a little weird. And so now what's cool about charts in ArcGIS Pro is not only did I make the chart, but it's interactive. So I can see that Thursday at 7 a.m. appears to be a hotspot, as does Sunday at 5 a.m. and Thursday at 5 a.m. So I'm going to select those. And as I make those selections in the chart, the points on the map are selected. That's cool, right? But that's not really how we want to think about necessarily this working. The way we actually work with this in practice more often is, here's my hotspot. Give me a chart just of my selected features. Okay, so I can do that using the select tool and the lasso tool. I'm just going to draw a lasso around my hotspot. And now I'm going to filter my chart by my selection. And now I have a chart that reflects just the little hotspot area that I've selected. So in that way, we can get very quickly to answers around when is my hotspot hot. Cool? Great. Okay. So we've got about 10 more minutes. I want to talk very quickly about how we get started with this kind of these tools. First, this crime analysis solution is free. You will find it here on our website, solutions.arcgis.com. This is where we have hundreds of free things that you can use to enhance your ArcGIS experience. Tools, app configurations, all sorts of stuff. If you scroll down here to local government, you'll see there's like a little content carousel. Click over once, and there's the law enforcement section. You come in here, you'll see here is all of our solutions for law enforcement, and one of them is perform a crime analysis. I also note that there's a whole bunch of other stuff here if you ever have a need to create a dashboard for your chief, build web-based tactical planning applications for your SWAT team or for tactical purposes. You want to build your own public crime map. You want to manage special events. You want to do kind of a Vision Zero project, or you've got an opioid problem or homelessness problem that you're trying to combat. Dashboards, web forms, interactive web maps, all pre-configured, ready to use with symbology, with existing data schemas, so you can turn it on and it works. But in this case, we're interested in perform crime analysis, so you go here, and there'll be a little download button that can let you download this into a zip file. The zip file that you're going to download, you're going to get two things. You're going to get a little add-in that you'll double-click to install, and that's what's going to make the toolbar pop up in ArcGIS Pro for you. And you'll get the exact same ArcGIS Pro project that I just showed you. All of the data, all of the example maps. So if you want to play with it, you don't have your data organized right, you want to get your head around the tools, it's all there. This tool only comes with ArcGIS Pro. There's not an equivalent tool for ArcMap. So if you don't have ArcMap, the first thing that you need to do is see the person who administers your licenses for your agency. That person has access to a licensing portal. That's where you get the installer to be able to install it on your machine. One of the other kind of gotchas potentially for ArcGIS Pro is that it is a 64-bit application, which means you need a 64-bit computer to run it. If your agency is still lagging on its hardware replacement and you're in a 32-bit computer, you're not going to be able to run ArcGIS Pro yet. But hey, that's a good excuse to be able to make the case for why you need a 64-bit computer. Importantly, I mentioned this before, but you can have ArcMap and ArcGIS Pro on your computer at the same time. In fact, that's what I recommend, because if you're doing production work in ArcMap, you need to know how to do it, because Chief comes in, you need to do something for them immediately. You can't be screwing around in something that you don't really understand. But you can have ArcGIS Pro, and you can learn it over time, and eventually, you know, you'll feel comfortable and you'll use ArcGIS Pro in its entirety, but the crime analysis solution can be kind of your binky. You can kind of learn, and you've got ArcMap there. If you can't get it to work in ArcGIS Pro, you could still use it in run it in ArcMap. For those of you who are not aware, there is a couple of different ways that ArcGIS Pro is licensed. If you use single-use licensing or concurrent-use license currently with your ArcMap licensing, it can still support those ways, and you get an authorization file. It also supports named user licensing, where each individual person has their own license. That's handled through your web mapping portal. That could either be ArcGIS Online or ArcGIS Enterprise. Again, that's something that you would talk to the person who manages your ESRI licensing about, which way that they are handling licensing for your organization. I should mention that the toolbars, there's a couple of licensing considerations. First, those density tools are not free. If you need Spatial Analyst extension to run those. So Spatial Analyst extension is required to run the kernel density tools that are in this toolbar. And there's a couple of additional capabilities. I mentioned the one with the distinct counts for incident count that do require a desktop license. We're working on it. We hope to have some of those license dependencies down at some point in the future, but at this point it does require a desktop advanced license. One of the other things that we're working on, hopefully, I'm not supposed to say this, our goal is to have the crime analysis solution not as an add-in, which is what you currently have to do, as a core part of the ArcGIS Pro deployment, maybe as soon as this July. So when you install ArcGIS Pro, you'll have the option to turn on the crime analysis toolbar as part of the core install to make it easier to deploy the tool. You're probably looking at me going, okay, well, this stuff is all cool, but this all still looks very hard. One of the things that we've really tried to do, the toolbar makes the process of doing mapping easier, but you get out of the box free training with this. So ESRI has a training website. It's called training.esri.com. You have rights to access that site and consume web courses for people who are on maintenance with their licensing. We built a 6-course series for the crime analysis toolbar. It'll teach you how to use all of those tools in the crime analysis toolbar. Self-directed web course. Our Ed Services person for public safety, Stacy Belladin's a former crime analyst. She wrote them all. She's working on another one for the cell phone analysis and for the repeat, near repeat tools as well. Hopefully we'll have them out winter time frame, January-ish. But all of the kind of base tools are all currently available as training classes, and they're organized according to those sections on the toolbar. I mentioned before, don't worry about pictures. Just record this, take a screenshot of this one URL, esriurl.com/dcjs2019. What you'll find there, it's on a OneDrive folder. What you'll find there is the PowerPoint that I just shared with you, the help documentation for the add-in and where to go to do the download, the link to the training, and a story map that explains all of the functionality of the tools. Why did I put that in there? Well, in case you have to go make the case to someone about why you want this thing, you can now take this little story map, which is just a web browser, and say, hey, boss, this is what this thing does and why I need it. Or, hey, IT administrator, this is why I need that 64-bit application. Here's what I can do with this tool. So it gives you a way to understand and explain to someone exactly what this set of capabilities does. If you have any questions about the toolbar, feel free to give me a buzz. I'm always glad to help. I work hand in hand with the development team. So if you run into a problem, you've got an idea for an enhancement, just general help questions, I'm in Rochester, so I'm around. And we've got 2 minutes left. Does anybody have a question? Otherwise, I'll take questions kind of offline after the end of the session. Yes, ma'am. No, not right now. You'd have to calculate them independently as a field calculation. Yeah. It's really just the kind of core parts of a date. That's it. Yep. Anything like a shift or yeah, it's not support, doesn't support that. Yep. Anyone else? Why don't we take that one offline, because that's sort of a broader question than just ArcGIS Pro. That's sort of a GIS fundamentals question that's a little bit more complicated. Anyone else? Hey, thanks everybody for coming. I hope this was useful for you. Please, if you have any questions, feel free to contact me directly. Thank you.
Chris is going to be here all morning. Let's just, if you want to see more of this, welcome you guys to come back for story maps and dashboards. 15-minute break. Feel free to come back. Thanks, everyone.
Let's get started for this session. Good morning, everyone. My name is Chris Delaney. I'm the law enforcement technical lead at ESRI. I was formerly with the Rochester, New York Police Department for 13 years as the Director of Business Intelligence. Joined with me today by Joe Gaynor, the GIS specialist of Broome County, and Kayla Macano, the Director of Operations for GIV in Monroe County. And in this session, we're going to be talking about how you can utilize ESRI technology to build story maps and dashboards to support law enforcement operations, with some examples that Kayla and Joe have put together that are real-life examples of this technology in practice. So my role at ESRI, if you guys are familiar with ESRI, we're the mapping company. So one of my roles at ESRI is to help law enforcement agencies understand how to apply ESRI's mapping technology to law enforcement workflows. And for many years, the workflow regarding mapping has been basically the same, is that there's all sorts of folks in a law enforcement agency who have mapping-related needs. Historically, that has been primarily in patrol operations and investigations for things like crime hotspots. But increasingly, there are a wider array of needs in law enforcement organizations. Public information kinds of requests, requests to support tactical operations by SWAT and tactical teams, event planning and management capabilities, being able to support grant opportunities and write smarter grants, to perform more data-driven evaluations, and increasing oversight for executive KPIs. And those can kind of span a variety of different areas, whether that's situational awareness, whether it's data collection from the field, analytical capabilities, constituent engagement. So there's all these needs in law enforcement agencies, and as kind of our lives are getting more and more used to making location-aware decisions like, hey, what bar do I go to during the New York State Conference? And I go to Yelp and I see what bars are near me. To make location context-aware decisions in our phones, we do the same thing in our work, where we want to be able to use location information to make smarter decisions about how we keep ourselves safe, how we spend our proactive time, and all of this has kind of created pressure on law enforcement organizations to leverage their location data better, to deliver those kinds of capabilities. But in practice, what we've seen for a large number of agencies is a process that's not quite as efficient. And that process generally is, hey, I'm someone in a law enforcement organization. I have a need. Who do I go to? I go to the crime analyst who has the mapping software. And that crime analyst with the mapping software has to go navigate a labyrinth of disparate, not organized databases with a wide variety of bad data schemas or bad address data, and they spend a ton of time trying to take that data and turn it into some kind of usable map product. They finally perform some analysis, and then how do they kick it out to the person who asked for it? Well, they kick it out in a hard copy map product. And that hard copy map product is a couple of things. First, it's out of date the minute that it leaves that analyst's desk. So if something else new that's important comes up, that process starts all over again because that product is static. It does not change. It does not evolve over time. It's done the minute it goes out the window. Secondly, if you've got a decision maker who says, okay, well, all right, I see this. Now I have additional questions I want to ask about that data. Now that starts another analytical process cycle to be able to kick that out. Maybe that decision maker needs to make that decision in a shorter decision cycle than the process that it takes for the analyst to do that analysis again. So it's time consuming to have an iterative engagement between decision maker and analyst. It's also not secure. I can remember, sadly, having some of the TAC guys bring me back one of our gang member printout sheets that somehow the gang member had gotten from our gang database. And that's the same thing is true with maps. Those maps go out into the ether in email, and they're gone, and who knows who prints them and who ends up with that kind of operationally sensitive information. There's no way to control access to that kind of capability. And this ability to engage between multiple people who have interest in that mapping, the information that's on that map is challenging. So there's all these kind of limitations of hard copy maps that are inherent to the old way of doing mapping in law enforcement that does not support this kind of modern interactive way in which we use maps and location information to make decisions in our work lives. And so that's, a challenge of technology in agencies, but it's also a challenge for folks like software providers like ESRI. And so what we've tried to do is modernize our set of capabilities to better support some of those interactive mapping needs and capabilities that law enforcement agencies need in a modern environment. And so for us, that means what we call the ArcGIS platform, where it's not just about desktop mapping software. It's about an entire suite of complementary products that work together to enable you to deliver interactive products to your end user. And so that starts with our desktop software. And that's our modern desktop software is called ArcGIS Pro. We just showed there's a brand new, in the last workshop, there's a brand new toolbar that we made specifically for ArcGIS Pro for crime analysts. And that helps to drive what we call WebGIS. And so WebGIS is the rest of the system. So analysts do work in desktop GIS, but then how do they share that information out to officers, to executives, to citizens? That's what WebGIS does. WebGIS first lets you take any kind of data that has location information and expose it as a web service. And I say web service, but that doesn't mean public cloud. It can live entirely inside of your network, secure as it does on thousands of law enforcement agencies' networks already across the country and across the world. It includes a authoritative content management system that we call a portal. And what that portal does is provide a security model that can be connected to Active Directory so that as an officer, I log into my computer for the day once, and it connects me and my security through into that portal, and that controls what layers and maps and applications I have access to. It also enables you to make browser-based interactive maps. Why does that matter? Well, because WebGIS also comes with over 50 configurable, ready-to-use apps. You want mobile apps for iOS and Android? We got them. You want interactive web mapping applications like a Storymap, which you'll see today? We've got them. You want to build dashboards? We've got them. You want to build forms to capture data in the field and have that feedback in real time to those dashboards? We've got them. So the idea here with this larger system is it's no longer just about hard copy maps. GIS can mean taking data and sharing it out to every user in a large mission or workflow so that every single person has a view of a map that's relevant to them. Someone working in the field, a tactical officer, has a mobile map, and they can see that map in real time the same as the commander can in a command post. And that information that's collected moves seamlessly into each individual user across these different apps in real time. It's really exciting. We don't have a ton of time to kind of go over those examples, but if you're ever interested in the future, feel free to give me a buzz. I have tons of examples from the Super Bowl to crime control operational strategies of various agencies utilizing this technology in really exciting ways, and you're going to see some today. So, and I've already kind of mentioned this a little bit, the tools for the analysts really still are desktop GIS. But the power of this web GIS is now that they can take their analysis and they can share it not just in that hard copy map, but now into these interactive products for officers and supervisors and executives. And two of the ones that we're going to highlight today are Storymaps and dashboards. When we use the word story map, the easiest way to think about it is an interactive briefing. Think about that PowerPoint that you're used to seeing people give at roll call. Instead of having that be a PowerPoint that lives on the sergeant's computer only, instead, it's an interactive browser-based app that now you can show not only at roll call, but anybody could pull it up in their MDT to recall something that was relevant. And it's fully interactive, so you can click on points and ask questions. Additionally, it can be connected to data in your RMS, in your CAD system, so that data is being updated in that interactive briefing live. So you're not building a new one of these things every single day. Your data is automatically refreshing, and then the only thing you have to do is make some changes to text or narrative, simplifying the process. So the first place that I want to start is Operations Dashboard. This is an example demonstration dashboard that I built a couple days ago for fun using some of Rochester's great shootings victims data that they already have available as ESRI Geoservices. Operations Dashboard is an out-of-the-box application. I'm not a coder. I'm not a developer. This is a wizard-based interface. I built this using that wizard-based interface. It gives you the ability to incorporate maps, charting, to be able to calculate things like percent change. I've built a whole bunch of filters here, so you can filter by shooting type and year and beat and gender and race and ethnicity. And all of the different elements on the dashboard can apply to those filters, or you can set certain ones to apply. You can control the way that things are grouped, so you can see that there's multiple tabs here. So it's an incredibly rich way to deliver a lot of valuable information to a decision maker. And they can bring data from a wide variety of sources. It can be things like real-time sources. We often see agencies connecting real-time CAD and AVL data to their dashboards. I did a webinar a few weeks ago, it's on YouTube, with Jacksonville Sheriff, showing some of the live CAD data that they're showing in some of their dashboards. And one with Philadelphia, where we showed how they've got live AVL, and Chicago's doing the same thing, live AVL feeds inside of their dashboards. And then on top of that, you can bring in some of your kind of more static or daily refresh data, offender data, probationers, parolees, crime data, operational plans, where are the areas where you have active crime patterns, or you're performing focused patrol details, or your jurisdictional boundaries. ESRI has data that you can bring in to improve situational awareness. So things like we have real-time traffic and real-time weather. So if you're working some kind of major event, a marathon or Super Bowl or something like that, and weather might be a factor that's going to influence your operations, you can have that as part of your picture. And there's usually kind of two primary ways in which we see agencies using these dashboards. First, it says kind of passive dashboards that might sit on a video wall where people kind of look at key indicators as they pass by that provides at a glance useful information, or that are meant for interactive dashboards. A lot of times I've seen examples where a chief has a tablet or a surface that they like to use, and they have a dashboard that they like to have up, and they bring it to community meetings so that they don't get ambushed by a community member that has this issue, and they don't really have any data that they can go investigate to answer that question. They can pull up that dashboard, and they can get information about what was done. Building these dashboards, as I mentioned, is actually quite simple. You do not need to be a developer. It's a pretty straightforward process. First, you're building a web map, pulling in the different data sources that you have. You're going to add these different elements that could be lists or charts or the percent change indicators. You're building it kind of around the map. Any of the elements in the dashboard can be powered by any layer in your map. You can control interactivity so that you can apply filters, or you can have it set up so when I click on a bar chart, it's going to filter and highlight just those selected features that represent that subsection that you've clicked on in the chart. Or if I've got a list of crimes and you click on the crime, it zooms to that location and flashes it. All of those kinds of interactions in the dashboard can be configured. You can control styling and look and feel. And then you've got a dashboard that you can share out with your users. This is an example of that Jacksonville dashboard that I was mentioning. The lighting isn't great here, so I apologize. But this is something that you'll find in basically all of the supervisors' desks. They'll have up their daily current calls dashboard. It's showing current response time, current active calls and status, volumes by district. And that's an example of kind of a live common operational picture example for day-to-day, in-the-moment operational management and situational awareness. Whereas you'll also find dashboards that are like this. This is a real dashboard, real user example from the Massachusetts Emergency Management Agency that works hand in hand with the Boston Police Department to coordinate the Boston Marathon. I couldn't show you the Boston Police's dashboard, but Mimo would let us show this one. What this has is not only live tracking of the front of the race, all the AVL and all the emergency vehicles. This green line along the marathon route is a representation of the number of runners that are at that point, as you can see in this chart, because they've gotten so far where they could connect to the API of the bib provider. They've got these little RFID tags that mark when a runner's gone over a certain place along the race. They're consuming the API from the bib runner, and so they can see exactly how many people have passed each part of the race. So really great situational awareness. This was a very cold day in 2008, so they had lots of weather issues. They also had people using some of the ArcGIS mobile apps to keep track of how many runners were in each of the tents, so that they knew where there was starting to be overcrowding issues in the medical tents, so that they could reallocate some of the EMS resources to better serve where the runners were coming in with hypothermic issues. And then executive summaries. This is an example from the Vancouver, Canada Police Department. This is their Crime Statistic Hub. It's a dashboard. Same technology, looks very different than the other ones, right? This one is just statistical measures. So it's all of their major crime categories. They've got these little gauges, red is bad, green is good, and they're also showing percent change indicators from each one, and they've got some filters that let you filter by date or by neighborhood. So these are very common examples of use cases around Operations Dashboard. But the best way to see this is for yourself, and Joe's going to talk about the dashboard that he's built for Broome County. So Joe, welcome, and I'll hand it over to you.
Okay. Morning, everybody. I'm a little nervous, so sorry I don't usually get up and talk in front of people. I'm usually at a desk crunching numbers. So my name is Joe Gaynor. I'm the GIS specialist for Broome County. I'm housed in the Broome County Planning Department. Probably about 10 years ago, we were approached by the Binghamton Police Department to do some crime analysis for them as part of their Operation Impact grant and now GIVE. So I've been with them, doing work with them for a couple of years now, and this year we launched a dashboard for them based on their incident and case data from their records management system. So the process of creating one for us was a little bit stranger than, or a little bit harder than the one he's been showing. That we did need to know some code, and I was helped by my boss, Doug English. I set up some recurring queries in our records management system. Doug has a task scheduler set up to run macros in Microsoft Excel to clean up the data, which I found out today can be done in Arc Pro when I get that. He also had a task schedule set up to upload data to ArcGIS Online through a Python script. And it overwrites all the data in there, so it updates. We have it set up to update 3 times a day. So with the incident data, we have it update 3 times a day and 1 time a day for case data. And I don't know, I didn't know much about the police data when I first started, but everything is an incident, and if it's important enough to become a case, it becomes a case. So we decided to include incident and case data in our dashboard. So just a couple of screenshots from our records management system. We use New World, Tyler Tech. So I set up some recurring queries in there to run around each shift. So around 7:30, 3:30, and 11:30 at night. So that each shift that came in could take a look at this and see what happened right before they came. So here's a screenshot of my supervisor's task scheduler. I didn't know how to do this. He's great at code. So he's got it set up to do all the things outside of our recurring queries. So here's the raw data when it comes in from Microsoft Excel. The macros are run on it, and then it cleans up the data a little bit and adds some things like hour, day, month, year, which relief it happened during or shift. We decided to go with occurred incident type field as what we were going to group all our data in. And we thought about doing penal law and a case offense statute, but there's a lot of duplication with that, especially if somebody gets charged with more than one crime. So we decided to go off the occurred incident type and group all those into what I felt were Part 1 crimes or other. We got the field of Part 1 if it fell within that, and had to have a unique ID included as well. So that goes to ArcGIS Online and overwrites the layers and the tables. So there's just a screenshot of ArcGIS Online. That's the data that's involved, the layers and the tables. Those get overwritten 3 times a day. The case just once a day, because cases don't come online to the records management system as fast as incidents do, because incidents are almost like calls for service. But when the cases come on, that gets added to, and we're usually like a day behind with that. This is just a screenshot of the first page of my dashboard. In case I couldn't bring up the live version, but it looks like I can today, so I'll go through some of that. The link's up there. It's password protected. It's mainly for supervisors and administrators, people making the decision on where to send people. It's got various tabs at the bottom here, down at the bottom. One of them is the incidents tab. That's the one that's open on now. The bigger dots are more recent. The smaller dots are later or older. The colored ones are the ones they're more interested in seeing, like the Part 1 crimes. The grayed out ones are everything. So they can see everything. And there's a list over here of everything that just happened that they can scroll through. And we got filters too. You can filter by the agency. So this is not just for the City of Binghamton Police, but the Sheriff's Office, Johnson City Police, Endicott, everybody that's online with our records management system. And you can filter it by beat or precinct, and that you'll see that our county, and that's our the patrol zones for each agency. You can also filter by crime type, Part 1 violent, Part 1 property, and other ones that aren't necessarily falling to Part 1. So that's all here. I'll show you that when I get to the live version. We also added, or you could filter by shift. So first, second, and third shift. And then the last two tabs are the ability to analyze data year to year and month to month. And that just focuses more on the tables I update, not the layers. So you got the time period tab. So the top one is incidents and the bottom one is cases. So the administration and supervisors can see when things are occurring, what day of week, hour of the day, and during which shift. You get percentages there. You got your 28-day incidents trend tab to see the last 28 days. Are you up or down in number of calls for service? And like I said, you can filter that by your own agency or by your own relief or even by a certain car patrol zone. We also have the 28-day Part 1 crimes and cases trend tab. This one's kind of hard to see, but this screenshot I took showed that property crime in the last 28 days was increased compared to last year. Violent crime was down compared to last year. And then we also added a one with all cases, so everything that became a report, and cutting off the most recent 8 days because of that lag with cases, with incidents becoming cases. So they can see increases and decreases that way. The second to last tab is the incidents year-over-year comparison, and this is all incidents, and it's hard to see right here, right now, what is along those, but it's every type of incident type that they can think of being interested in. And at the bottom is number of incidents by patrol zone. And again, you can filter that by your agency, your beat, and your shift. And the last one, here's a specific incident one. This one I picked, I can't remember what type of crime I picked here, but that, you see how it's shots fired. So you can see that last year they had 140, this year they have 102, so they went down. This is comparing last year to 2 years ago, and so they can see that 2 years ago they had 205, this year they had 100, last year they had 186, and up to this point this year they had 102. So they see where they're going. And then again at the bottom by patrol zone. And the last one goes with the case data. So we get away from the incident data, everything, to just the ones that became reports. And this is all Part 1 by violent and property crime. So same thing with the incidents, but it's ones that have become cases. And this is a specific example with burglary. And this one particular had, for that year to date, the burglaries had increased compared to last year. So now I'll go to the live version. So I don't know how easy it is to see, but again, this is the first tab, the instance tab. The bigger dots are more recent. You got a list of everything that happened this was last run at 7:30 this morning. So it got everything right up until 6:48, criminal mischief. You can filter, like I said, you can filter by agency. If I pick Binghamton, it's going to zoom into Binghamton and only have their points on. Takes a little while. You got to give us, it's a lot of data going on, and if your internet is not very good, it can be a little slow. You can filter it by a specific beat. It'll zoom into that beat and just have those points on. And then you could also do by shift. And you can just turn those up, go back to all, and we'll zoom back out. And say you just want to see violent crime. It'll just have that on. And you see everything updates on the fly as I'm doing that. So that's mostly robberies coming up in there in the last 28 days. So they can also filter by yesterday. No robberies yesterday, good. Last 7 days, 2. Last 14 days. And it's always defaulted to 28 days. And that's how we like to compare data is when if you're a crime analyst, you know that. Move on to the cases tab. So these are the ones that become reports. And again, you can filter by whatever agency you want. So all the agencies in our county have access to this. It's password protected. So Endicott could go and look at what they had in the last 28 days. They can go on this time period, like I show on the PowerPoint. You could go on the 28-day incidence trend to see if you're up or down. The previous 28 days with Part 1 crimes. And then this is the one that's pretty neat for comparing, go to the sheriff on this one, comparing month to month and year to year. So if we did right up to end of September and turn on all these months, you'll see this update. Takes a little while, but it does update. And then if you want to not see all, you just want to see property, it'll update there too. And that'll be able to see by which car post or beat has the most and which has the least. You can do the same thing with Part 1 crimes in the last tab, the ones that have become cases. So I think that's about it. That's all I got for now.
Thanks, Joe. That's really cool stuff. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of flavor for the kinds of capabilities that the Operations Dashboard tool can help you to configure your own dashboards. And one kind of key point that I want to reiterate off of Joe's presentation is that Joe and his team didn't just download this and this was what it was. They built it. They built it off of operational needs for being able to slice and dice data. And that's really kind of one of the most powerful aspects of some of these interactive tools is that they can be whatever you want them to be. You can configure these different parts of a widget to surface whatever matters to you for the intended user of that dashboard. It's not just an app and it is what it is, and if you want something different, you got to go back out to RFP and you got to buy some additional customization stuff. You can make it however you want it to be. So that was a look at some of the dashboard technology. The next thing that I want to do is talk a little bit about the interactive briefing capability that I mentioned before with ArcGIS Storymaps. And so at a very high and simple level, ArcGIS Storymaps are web applications that combine a couple of different things to make a comprehensive app. First, interactive maps that you can control what layers are on the map, where you're zooming into, behaviors of the map. Various multimedia content. So you've got Bolo images of bad guys. You can put them in there. You've got PDF documents. You can put them in there. You need to link to a video on YouTube. You can put that in there. Any website can live inside of a story map. And interactivity. So you can control kind of, imagine sort of like digital pages. You can move from page to page to page. You can control the map inside of this. You can have kind of other app-based interfaces that control what your user of that app is experiencing. And we at ESRI use these story maps to help our users tell any kind of story that has something to do with geography or location. But when it comes to law enforcement, that generally are stories around briefings, bulletins, talking about investigations. These story maps, you know, I'm using this word story maps, but it really represents kind of a family of different apps. So we have kind of 7 different templates for these story maps, and why you would use a certain template versus another one really depends upon kind of the different features that you are looking to surface. I see analysts or law enforcement agencies primarily using the story map journal, which I think is kind of most analogous to sort of a briefing book, or the story map series, which has kind of a series of tabs that let you go from piece of content to piece of content. One of the things that I think are particularly important for law enforcement agencies is that story maps are built using a web developer concept that's called responsive design. And what's important about the concept of responsive design is that the app knows what size device it's being viewed on. Why that matters is that the app automatically resizes and changes how it actually looks when you pull it up on a mobile device. So it's easier to use for an officer in the field who wants to recall something from that briefing. It's in a mobile-friendly interface, whereas if they open it up on the desktop, it's got its full interface. So it responds to what kind of app that it's being viewed on automatically without you having to do it. And importantly, like the dashboards, this is not a coding kind of thing. These has a kind of a builder wizard capability on the backside that walks you through building them, and you don't have to be a developer to be able to build these kind of apps. So here's a real quick example that I built. I'm kind of a homer, so I end up building a lot of my examples in Rochester. This is an example of what a story map would look like for an interactive briefing. And you know what? This is moving too fast, so I haven't really mastered the art of perfectly timing GIFs. So I'm going to show you what this actually looks like in real life. So the concept here is we have some information about a series of retaliatory shootings involving 2 sets of gangs. How would we normally push that information out to officers for some kind of operational response? Well, we typically build a PDF and shoot that out. And then something happens, maybe another incident happens. Well, now we have to reissue a whole nother bulletin. And maybe people are working off the new bulletin, but maybe people are working off the old bulletin. Maybe something has happened where there is someone who was originally an investigative target in the first bulletin, and now we want to be hands off of that person next time around. Well, if you don't have a mechanism for recalling that bulletin, that information that's no longer current is still out there. This enables you to have a fully interactive bulletin. And so the first page of this bulletin is, here's the series of events, these shootings that happened, an overview, just like you would in a regular bulletin, a couple of different crews fighting. Here's the first shooting incident. I've got these little hyperlinks. When I click on the hyperlink, that pulls up the mugshot. Here's the second guy. Here's the other mugshot. I was in Indianapolis 2 months ago, and I was showing this, and the deputy chief, or it was chief, goes, "Hey, I really appreciate you using our guys in your demo." I'm like, "What are you talking about, our guys?" I'm like, "That's our guy." I'm like, "What?" I searched a Google search, totally random. So this guy's from Indianapolis, obviously, you know, pretty easily identifiable. So you can pull in these different images. They can show up with these links to kind of, you're controlling with these links the experience of the user and what you want the user to see. The whole incident came about from a YouTube video of a sucker punch, and that triggered the back and forth. This is just notional, it's just a made-up story, but you get the idea of the capabilities with the story map. And then it's going to continue to walk you through all of the incidents in the series. But then the thing that's kind of exciting about this is when it comes to mission tactics that might be evolving over time as your attempt to intervene is changing. My sound from my video is still going. Your mission tactics, as they're changing over time, you can have kind of interactivity with them. So maybe step one is we're going to run some focus patrols in the gang turf of these two different crews. Okay? That's the area we want to run those focus patrols. We also want you to do some active warrant service on members in those locations. Well, there's all the warrants that are currently active. Go hit those hit those warrants. Or here are the members of this gang that are on parole. Let's go get with parole. Let's go do some house searches on those guys. So when you think about all the different tactics we might apply to address and intervene in a retaliatory gang dispute, you can have all of those laid out right here. And as conditions change, all the analyst has to do is go in here, change those links, change that text, and your bulletin is updated and ready to go for anyone who's subsequently going to view that information. Now you might be going, okay, well, this is cool, but we live in a non-digital world in the field, and we have to have hard copy things. Okay, that's fair. There's a little link button up here. You can press that. You can press the print button. And now you have a printable version of that story. Obviously, you don't have all the interactivity, but it's there in case you need it. So that's an example of one of these kinds of bulletins. A couple of other ways that I see analysts, and this is just another screenshot from New Orleans. So I mentioned daily briefings. This is the New Orleans kind of crime control strategy program is called the MAX program. This is the daily briefing that they use. It's a story map. They have all these simple buttons. It enables at roll call you to walk through all the priority crime types, walk through what's going on in each district, and anyone can pull this up in their vehicle. They can pull it up in the roll call room. Another really popular use of these story maps, and you'll see this from Kayla, is citizen engagement. So this is from the Bakersfield, California PD. This is their public-facing app for community engagement around who their CPOs, their crime prevention officers, their community engagement officers are. You can see the territory that each individual officer is responsible for, and you can get all their contact information. I've got another great example that I'm not going to show here of Sacramento County Sheriff putting out basically all of the information that they had on a cold case serial murderer, serial rapist. And there was nothing happening in this case. It was like a 30-year-long window in the case. And they basically threw it all out there and said, hey, anyone who can help us provide some information, context on this. And they did get some leads to follow up off of that. But it's a great way to organize information, be able to control the message around it, and to be able to deliver it out to citizens. And then another example of story maps is to kind of be a one-stop shop for a lot of different web-based applications that you might be using for a particular example. This one is from our user conference where we had a variety of dashboards, web applications, and forms for our security team that was managing our user conference. But Philadelphia Police Department uses a story map for their sworn officers and puts all of the different apps that they expect sworn analysts to use into a story map. So some of these apps are ESRI apps, but some of them are Accurant and a social network analysis tool. They're all websites. They can all live inside of the story map. But now, in one single place, they know the analysts just have to open this link, and here are all of the tools that are available for you as a resource. Oh, there's the example. So I've talked a little bit about kind of the value of story maps and how they're utilized in law enforcement. I'm going to turn it over to Kayla now, and Kayla's going to talk about the really great example of a story map that she put together for GIVE that I use as a really great example of how to apply story maps, particularly around being able to do justification and demonstration of the value of grant-based projects. So, Kayla, I'll turn it over to you. Okay.
Good morning, everyone. So as Chris said, he covered quite a bit of the Storymaps website and how there's all sorts of different layouts and templates that you can use depending on the information that you have. Before I go too much into the one that I created, I wanted to briefly discuss how we got to creating a story map in Monroe County. So as part of the GIVE initiative, the Monroe County executive team decided that last year for GIVE 5, that they really wanted to focus more on community engagement and transparency within all of the GIVE efforts. So they created a position for community engagement and communications. At the time, I applied and got that role. And the first step was kind of creating a communication strategy to determine what to do with this position and how best to utilize my time. So with the communication strategy that I kind of worked through, it was really what information that we wanted the community to be aware of, how to get that information out there, and who to share it with. So in creating this story map that I'll go through, I really wanted information that was able to be made public. So perhaps with Joe's dashboard, as he said, it's only within the Broome County organization, but this story map is public. So anyone who's online can go to the Rochester Open Data Portal, look at all of their data, but also find this story map. So just to go through it quickly, I really wanted the community in Monroe County and Rochester to be familiar with what the GIVE initiative is, who all of the partners are that are involved, and what they do, so that people realize, sure, gun violence is a big problem. It's, it affects everyone. That's why we're all here. But there is something that a large group of Monroe County agencies is working on. So on the first page, as you go into it, you get a brief summary on what GIVE is, that it started in New York State around 2014 after Operation Impact, kind of narrowed its focus, and then gives a little descriptor of Monroe County, and then we have somewhat of an interactive map for Rochester to say, okay, here's some of the problem-oriented policing or hotspot areas that we focus our efforts in. Here are the dotted lines, as you can see over in the legend. That's where our SNUG outreach team focuses their efforts. And then we can go in and someone can say, all right, let's see who's all involved in this GIVE program that you're talking about. And we have a list of all of our partners. You can see in the map, if we can scroll in a little bit. Oops, not that much. The mouse is kind of weird, so I don't really know how to use it. Sorry, I got a weird mouse. That's okay. But you can zoom in a little bit and see where all of the partners are located. And that's kind of cool to say, oh, all right, here's where SNUG team is, here's the Crime Analysis Center, our social service providers, and then this is, I think, the shortlist template, and you can have all of the little tiles that you can click on or scroll through. So if you want to know some of what our police department does for the GIVE initiative, you can go there, and you can scroll right through and get a description of what all of the partners are involved with. Again, you can even click on the map and go through that way and see. And then the next tab, this is kind of slow to load too with all this stuff in here. We have, again, all of the tiles and icons for the specific efforts that we're doing as well. So if someone wants to learn about the problem-oriented policing areas and the hotspot areas, you can scroll through and say, oh, okay, in GIVE 5, we had 7 hotspot areas that referred to as problem-oriented policing areas in Rochester. You can see what sections they're in and some of the general information on that. You can click back and say, oh, all right, what are we doing around informational checkpoints? And you can see, that this is another community engagement tool that we implemented last year to, spread information on GIVE and some of the services that are available to the community. We have a couple dashboards in here as well. So if it's public data, and you have a public story map, you can embed that right within your story map. And because ours is linked to our Crime Analysis Center and our Business Intelligence Center, who run the open data portal, this updates automatically as they go through their data. So if you want to see across the city, you can see the total incidents from 2011 to 2019. But if you're looking to, say, move to a different area of the city, or you want to know what's going on in your neighborhood, you can also click on one of the pop areas. It'll highlight it, and then it automatically changes the data on there. To show you, okay, so there were 5,000 across the city, and there were 198 in this section, in this small little piece of the city. You can go through investigation status to see, 54% of the cases were officed in this area, 30% were cleared by arrest, and so on. And then lastly, people always want to know, well, are these programs working? And so we can go into the last tab for the New York State assessment. And again, you can see that this is a different template based on the data. But we go in and say, yeah, we think our efforts are working because, our research team at RIT helped with the evaluation of GIVE, and our implementation looked really good, between each quarter and across the years. And as you can see, these are interactive a little bit as well, where you want to see just the state or Rochester in general. And then you have a brief description of, all of the measurement tools that were used in determining how well Rochester is implementing their GIVE strategies. And everything, it's kind of nice, it all resets after you click away, so no one can mess it up. If a community member worries that once they click on the dashboard and they, click on this pop area and they can't figure out how to get back to all of the data, they can click away, and it'll all reset. So it's pretty user-friendly, and as Chris was saying, it's very easy to use. You don't need code or script or anything, because I don't know how to do any of that. That's foreign language to me. But it is very easy to create story maps. I taught myself in about a day. And then the more that you work through it, the more features that you figure out that you can work on, like embedding different templates into one, as you can kind of see that I did here. And then you can use them for a variety of things. Like I said, we're using it as a way to be transparent and share information with the community. But if you're a crime analyst running your GIVE meetings, every month you could build a story map with a dashboard to go through some of the crime data from the previous month or weeks. If you want to make a bulletin that's up in your police department with some of the top offenders and some of the areas to be watching, you can do that as well. And I think that's all that I have.
Thanks, Kayla. I think Kayla's being a little modest with respect to her skills that she acquired in this project, because what I particularly like about this story map, and I've used this as demonstration materials when I'm presenting to law enforcement agencies around the country, is that it really represents all of those use cases for story maps that I was just talking about. So the assessment section really is kind of an example of kind of a briefing or a report that would otherwise live in a hard copy version. This is an interactive briefing, right? That's use case number one. And use case number two is around citizen engagement. This is inherently a public-facing app. And then third, that it acts as a container for multiple apps. And in fact, that's what she's done here. So the top part of this is a story map template with multiple different pages. And in any of these pages, you can put whatever you want. You can put a web page. You could put a map and some text. You could put like the images like I showed. And she's done that here. There's just an interactive web map here. This is pretty straightforward. But in some of these other pages, she's embedded other story maps. And in the GIVE data dashboard, she's actually embedded operations dashboard that I showed you in the beginning of this presentation. So she's really created a very rich experience for the users of this story map by combining these different story maps and apps into a single experience for the user that for them is seamless to these different kinds of app technologies. So that's really exciting and really represents kind of a best practice not only for citizen engagement, but for how we provide information to officers, to supervisors, to executives, and other stakeholders, organizing the information using story maps in a combination of different dashboards, story maps, other web applications to give everyone the exact set of capabilities they're looking for. So the next question that you might have after kind of seeing these capabilities, how do you get started on some of this stuff? Well, these dashboards and these story maps are part of ESRI's WebGIS technology. That WebGIS technology lives in two ways. First, it's available in the public cloud as ArcGIS Online. That's what Kayla is using, and that's also what Joe is using. But many law enforcement agencies choose to use our server technology. So many of your agencies already have our ArcGIS server product. The modern version of our ArcGIS server product is called ArcGIS Enterprise. And when you deploy ArcGIS Enterprise, you get all of this stuff as part of it. So our server technology includes the dashboard capabilities and the story map capabilities, and that can live entirely inside your network, secure, so you can have operationally sensitive data inside that environment, and that's a use case that many law enforcement agencies across the country are leveraging. Basics of learning dashboards and story maps. We've got great web training courses that are free for our users on maintenance at training.esri.com, self-guided web courses. And just for some kind of inspiration on how to get started, I usually recommend going to check out our webinar series. As part of the law enforcement team, I do, they're either monthly or bi-monthly webinars on various capabilities. So we've done great user case examples around law enforcement applications of story maps and law enforcement applications of dashboard that can kind of give you kind of a starting point for thinking about how you might be able to take advantage of this technology in your organization. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. You can reach me at cdelaney@esri.com, so it's really, really easy. Or if you can't remember that, just email Anthony and tell him to get my contact info, and I can glad to talk with you about any of these capabilities, put you in touch with Joe or Kayla or any other law enforcement agencies that are currently using some of this kind of technology. We've got about 5 minutes left, just a little bit of time for questions. Does anybody have any questions? Yes, sir. Sure.
Okay. Yes. No comment.
Let me rephrase that. Are there any real questions? No one else? Well, thank you all very much for your time. We're available for additional questions offline afterwards. Thank you.